16. Then went Samson to Gaza, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. And it was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night in the gate of the city, and were quiet all the night, saying, In the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. And Samson lay till midnight, and arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city, and the two posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of an hill that is before Hebron. So I would imagine, and I hate that we don't get more detail in the saga of Samson, because they do wrap up a whole bunch of narrative in one or two verses every now and then. I would imagine in 20 years of judging Israel, for the Philistines to come at him as aggressively as they do, that instances like this play out with some regularity. That he was making a whole bunch of trouble for the Philistines, that they would try with some regularity to set traps, to lay ambushes, to figure out where he is and send assassins, send people there. They don't tell us any of that, but I think it's a safe bet. Now, there's no telling just how much trouble he caused for the Philistines in 20 years of judging Israel. And here's an example of one of those episodes here. Samson goes to Gaza, and that's a pretty big deal in itself, because Gaza is the capital of the Philistine Empire. They've got 5 major cities, and Gaza is the most important one. And the account here, like I said, it's super brief, and I really wish we had more, because if he's alone, or if he traveled in disguise, or how this whole thing played out, I'd love to know. Because if he's alone just walking around the city in plain view, that would take some nerve. If that's how it is, then he just doesn't care anymore. He feels like God's got his back, and after he killed 1,000 Philistines with a jawbone, he feels like he's more or less invincible. God's bailed him out over this last time period, and Samson's kind of playing fast and loose now. And I don't think it's too far a stretch to say that that's probably how it was, because just 2 chapters ago, when he saw the girl that he was to marry, the author told us that it was all according to God's plan to escalate tensions between the Israelites and the Philistines, to cause conflict between them, and because God saw fit to judge their wickedness and deliver his people once again. So we're not told why Samson goes to Gaza, but while he's there, a harlot catches his eye, and he goes into her home or brothel, whichever she works, and he engages in sexual immorality. And while he is in with the harlot, word gets around to the men of the city that none other than Samson, the scourge of the Philistines, who killed 1,000 of our brothers with the jawbone of an ass, that guy is in Gaza, and he's in with a harlot. And if we just wait at the gate of the city, we can attack him when he's tired, when he hasn't slept all night, when he least expects to be attacked, and finally rid ourselves of this enemy. And that sounds like a pretty good plan, right? Laying in ambush, middle of the night. But something goes wrong, and we don't know exactly what. The best guess is the harlot found out about the plot and told Samson, because that's the only thing in my mind that can explain what follows. Instead of partying all night and leaving in the morning, Samson gets up at midnight, and he leaves the harlot, and he goes to the city gates, and he doesn't just fling open the doors or smash them down. The man plucks the gate of the city out of the ground, the whole gate, the doors, the side posts, the bars, across the top of it, all of it. He hoists it up out of the ground onto his shoulders and just carries the gate of the city to the top of a hill north of Gaza, overlooking the hills of Hebron, which the hills of Hebron were about 9 miles away. So it's this tall hill, so it's a bit of a climb. And then I would assume, again, because we don't have the detail, that he just throws the gate to the side and goes about his business.
This Gaza city is the same Gaza.
Same Gaza. Yep. Right there it's a coastal city. It's stayed right there in what Palestine, as they call it now, the Gaza Strip, but it is the same Gaza. So I don't know about you, but if I'm lying in wait to kill a guy to assassinate someone who is infamous, who has become legend for his feats of strength, and not just feats of strength, but horrific violence. Was it hip upon knee or something like that? I forget the actual phrasing of it. And then heaps on heaps as he was slaying them with a jawbone here. If I see him go to the gates of the city and just casually rip him out of the ground, put him on his shoulders, and then start carrying the things off like it's a bucket of water or something like that, I'm going to lay down my sword and pretend that this whole thing never happened. I wasn't here. I'm going to go right back to my house, and when my wife asks me where I was, I'm going to say I went for a walk, I needed some fresh air, something like that. It's a surreal scene, what it's painting right here. These guys are laying their hands on their swords, watching in the middle of the night, and the dude just goes up there, grabs hold of it, pulls it out of the ground, puts it on his shoulders, and then just starts walking. And again, he has to be in the know. He has to know something's going on, because why else give this demonstration? If you don't think anybody's watching, why else do it? So he has to think somebody's watching him, and he puts on this feat of strength to deter any kind of attack, and it was quite effective. Verses 4 through 5. And it came to pass afterward that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, Entice him, and see wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee, every one of us, 1,100 pieces of silver. So at long last, we get to Delilah. Samson and Delilah. That's the big, what was the director who did that movie? I can't remember. One of the big epic, they used to have big budget biblical epics, Samson and Delilah, along with the Ten Commandments and the, what was the other one that was really huge? Cleopatra. There was a number of them right there. So Samson and Delilah. We don't know a whole lot about Delilah. We assume things, but we don't really know. She may have been Jewish. She may have been a Philistine. Some people think that Samson married her. Some people think that she was just another harlot, similar to the one in the first 3 verses there. While God spared Samson the punishment of his immorality in the previous 3 verses, the punishment of God can't ultimately be avoided here. So he's gotten away with it once. Maybe he's getting comfortable. And it's a lesson to us all. Samson may well have thought after his first interaction with the harlot in Gaza that God had chosen him. God didn't really care about his sin, that he was essentially getting away with it. And now he's falling even deeper into that same sin, and I'm sure further than he wanted to go. He's in love with this harlot, Delilah. And this sin that he thinks he's getting away with has a hold of him now more than it ever did and than he ever intended. And we all know how it ends. We do, but he doesn't. He thinks he's okay. He thinks he's coasting along here. And the leaders of the Philistines find out that Samson's in love with Delilah, so they go to her and they offer her a bribe of 1,100 pieces of silver from each of them. Now we know, according to Judges chapter 3, verse 3, namely, 5 lords of the Philistines and all the Canaanites and the Sidonians and the Hivites dwelt in Mount Lebanon from Mount Bel Hermon unto the entering of the Hamath. We know that with those 5 cities of the Philistines, there are 5 lords of the Philistines here. All 5 of them come to Delilah and say, we will each of us give you 1,100 pieces of silver, so 5,500 pieces of silver, if you can figure out this secret. Now, that's an enormous bribe. It's not quite never work again money. It's not a fortune, but it is, clear all your credit cards kind of money. That's a good substantial bribe. And when they present the bribe to Delilah, it's super interesting how the verse is worded. It says, "See wherein his great strength lieth." That almost makes it sound like a trinket, like he has a magic amulet or something like that. They don't seem to attribute his strength at all to any kind of divine relationship. Maybe it's something he's wearing, maybe it's something he's eating, something he's drinking. There's got to be some secret to it that maybe we could even replicate or we can take away from him. There's got to be something there that they're missing. But oddly enough, even with all they know, being chosen of God doesn't enter their minds. And they've seen that over and over and over. With Joshua, when he was conquering the land of Canaan, his reputation was going out for being the leader of the army of God. We've strayed from that a little bit here. The people around the Israelites now are suddenly not piecing things together because they're living as they are living. They're living with everybody doing what is right in their own sight. They're no longer binding themselves to the laws of God, and the people around them are no longer connecting them with God. Verses 6 through 9. And Delilah said to Samson, "Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee." And Samson said unto her, "If they bind me with 7 green withs that were never dried, then shall I be weak and be as another man." Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 green withs which had not been dried, and she bound him with them. Now there were men lying in wait, abiding with her in the chamber. And she said unto him, "The Philistines be upon thee, Samson." And he brake the withs as a thread of tow is broken when it toucheth the fire, so his strength was not known. Delilah goes to Samson, and it's hard to feel sorry for this guy, really, because she's not rooting through his trash. She's not looking for prescription bottles or stalking his parents or anything like that, trying to figure out what's going on. It's not some nefarious plot. She goes straight to the man and she says, "How are you so strong, and how can I cripple you?" And I mean, to be perfectly honest, if that doesn't send up a red flag in Samson's mind, then he kind of deserves what's coming. If he hasn't gathered that much wisdom as he's grown into a man here. He would not be the first man to have absolutely lost his senses in love, though, right? Especially to a harlot. Harlots are trained in leading men to abandon their inhibitions. And I assume Delilah was probably a very attractive woman to have caught Samson's eye. Now, it's the exact thing that is described in Proverbs 7, and this is wisdom literature here. Proverbs 7, verse 21. "With her much fair speech she caused him to yield, with the flattering of her lips she forced him. He goeth after her straightway as an ox goeth to the slaughter, or as a fool to the correction of his stocks, till a dart strike through his liver, as a bird hasteth to the snare, and knoweth not that it is for his life. Hearken unto me now, therefore, O ye children, and attend to the words of my mouth. Let not thine heart decline to her ways, go not astray in her paths, for she hath cast down many wounded. Yea, many strong men have been slain by her. Her house is the way to hell, going down to the chambers of death." It sounds like it's talking about Delilah. It's not. That is a general warning about harlots and women of loose morals in general in the wisdom literature, but it sounds like it is tailor-made for this situation. And Samson, having the weaknesses he has, succumbed to her wiles, and he hasn't completely fallen just yet. He doesn't tell her everything. For the time being, he's guarding his secret, crafts a lie, or maybe he's just joking around with her, and he can't really see the nefarious intentions that she has behind it. But he tells Delilah if he is bound with 7 green withs that were never dried, he will be as a normal man. We don't really know what the word withs means. Some people think it is a word for vines of some kind of specific plant. Some people think it has a more fleshy kind of meaning. And when I say that, I mean like sinews or even guts, the kind that you would dry out to make strings, like cat gut on a guitar or something like that. It is used in the Psalms to talk about bows shooting arrows. So if it's used for bowstrings, it would be something fairly durable, more than a vine, you would think, but we don't rightly know. And Samson tells her it has to be 7 of them specifically. And that detail seems to be given in order to really sell the lie. There is some kind of a mysticism to this. 7 is the number of completion for the Israelites. If you bind me with 7 of these cords of whatever they're made, 7 of them being the number of completion, then I lose my strength. Well, that's the only other reference we have to it in the Psalms, but the word itself is not bowstring as we know it.
In my Bible, it's thongs.
Thongs. There we go. So, some kind of band, something like that. Delilah tells the information to the Philistine lords, who promptly give her the exact thing that would debilitate Samson, and she bound Samson with them, and it had to be while he was sleeping, you would think. Again, this account played out, I'm sure, over a number of days, and we're just given a handful of verses for it, but she binds him more than likely while he's asleep, and she says to Samson that the Philistines are upon him, and the only way that whole scene makes sense is if Samson's asleep and she's shouting him awake. And she's saying, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. She's like, shock him, see if his strength has really gone from him. And we don't get a lot of detail on how things went down, but Delilah woke Samson by telling him the Philistines were upon him. They're here, get up. And when he woke, he snapped the green withes that had bound his hands like they were just absolutely nothing. So he obviously still had his strength. And then I guess she had to calm him down, tell him the coast was clear, tell him that they're not really Philistines here, maybe play the whole thing off as a bit of a joke or some fun that she was having or something like that. And then I guess she has to get him to go back to sleep or send him off to chop wood or go down the street to get a gallon of milk, something like that, because she's still got a small detachment of Philistines in her bedroom, back in her chambers. And they obviously can't stay there all night, so somehow she had to get rid of the guy. The logistics, I don't really know, but had to deal with the Philistines that were waiting for his strength to be gone. Verses 10 through 12. And Delilah said unto Samson, Behold, thou hast mocked me, and told me lies. Now tell me, I pray thee, wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If they bind me fast with new ropes that never were occupied, then shall I be weak, and be as another man. Delilah therefore took new ropes, and bound him therewith, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And there were liars in wait abiding in the chamber. And he brake them from off his arms like a thread. Delilah's second attempt here, it seems a little more serious. It's not just the pretty pleas of the first one. It's accusations that she has been mocked and lied to, and the thing that was all fun and games is getting a little bit more serious now, because she's telling Samson that she's thought about it, and she's starting to take personal offense that he did not tell her the truth, digging in just a little bit more because she is the woman he loves, and why wouldn't you tell me the truth? And this time, Samson tells her that if you would bind me with new ropes, ropes that have never been used, then I would be as weak as any other man. So guess what she did? She got new ropes. She did the whole thing over again. She got him to sleep, bound his hands with fresh ropes, had a bunch of Philistines waiting under her bed or in her dresser, back in her closet, wherever you hide a whole bunch of Philistines. And they once again watched as she called out to Samson and said, Hey, Samson, the Philistines are upon you. And he shot out of his slumber, and he breaks the ropes like they were absolutely nothing. It says just like they were a thread. Verses 13 and 14. And Delilah said unto Samson, Hitherto thou hast mocked me and told me lies. Tell me wherewith thou mightest be bound. And he said unto her, If thou weavest the 7 locks of my head with the web. And she fastened it with the pin, and said unto him, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awakened out of his sleep, and went away with the pin of the beam and with the web. So this, culturally, we don't get a whole lot of what's going on here, because she's talking about weaving and having a loom and weaving his hair into something. I imagine she's ratcheting up her displeasure just a little bit here, because she has previously. So he comes up with another line. This time, Samson almost playfully decides to include his hair in the lie. And his hair is the secret to the whole thing. And now he's dancing around it just a little bit. He's tiptoeing up to the point of telling her his big secret, but he doesn't just yet. He tells her, if my 7 braids of my long hair, because that's how he would have worn it, 7, not dreadlocks, but actual braids, he said, if they're woven together on a weaver's loom, he'd be as helpless as any man. And so she makes it happen. And this one would have been a little bit more difficult because she would have had to position Samson like with his head in her lap or something like that, or on the floor next to the loom, or have him go to sleep and then tell the Philistines, quietly, bring the loom over here, let's weave his hair together. I don't know how this would have worked out. However she did it, she got the job done. Samson's hair was woven together, and it was locked down on the weaver's loom with the pin, and she called out to him the same exactly as she did before, and he jumped up, and his hair woven into the fabric on the loom, that weaver's loom went with him. He was dragging the thing around until he broke it apart. It's a really odd picture, but so he wakes up, he feels like he's got, and there's this giant loom thing hanging behind him until he breaks it. So, a pattern's been established. Like I said, it's hard. But I mean, to be honest, I see a lot of couples out there, and it's hard to feel sorry for them. But sometimes going back to the same person over and over and over, you lose my sympathy.
That's what I'm saying. It's hard to feel sorry for them.
In this, yeah, I know. But again, love makes us do many foolish things.
No, it makes them Let's clarify. I don't think this was love. I think it was lust. That is.
I don't know. That is definitely his weakness. It says directly that he loved this woman. Now, whether you want to interpret that as not being quite the love that we would consider love, I think it is an escalation beyond just a night with a harlot. I think he's forming a relationship with her. And maybe it's not classic love as we know it, at the very least an infatuation. Yes, sir?
You know in the Greek if they use eros, phileo, storge, or agape?
There's a whole bunch of different loves, yeah.
You know which one they use for that one?
Well, I mean, it's written in Hebrew. Yeah, so we don't... I'm sure it's not agape. Very sure. We're not quite there.
I mean, if he is sound asleep enough that she can weave his hair, why didn't she just kill him? I mean, seriously, if she wanted the money,
Well, she's not wanting to kill him.
she's...
How might I bind thee over and over? The Philistine lords want him. They want to be able to do it. So it's not, she could have killed him a dozen times over. Any one of you women could kill your husbands a dozen times over. The trick is incapacitating him, right? Don't y'all say right. Don't say it.
This is kind of like our day. We're dealing with a woman who's 40% persistent and a guy who's 60% stupid.
He's a big old dummy. Verses 15 through 17. And she said unto him, How canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherewith thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him so that his soul was vexed unto death, that he told her all his heart, and said unto her, There hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazarite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. So Delilah's had it now. That girl wants her silver, and she's tired of waiting. And it's all the same notes that you see Samson enduring in chapter 14. 14 verses 15 through 17. And it came to pass on the 7th day that they said unto Samson's wife, Entice thy husband, that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. Have ye called us to take that we have? Is it not so? And Samson's wife wept before him and said, Thou dost but hate me, and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people, and hast not told me. And he said unto her, Behold, I haven't told my father or mother. It's all the same notes. You don't love me. How could you say you love me if you're not telling me absolutely everything? and she pressed him daily, just like his betrothed pressed him daily. You remember we talked about that? It was a 7-day wedding feast, and at the very end, she finally got him, but she had been pressing him the whole time. In the wedding misadventure, it says that she lay sore upon him. Here it says that his soul was vexed unto death. Probably even a little worse than what he had gone through previously. It sounds like he may have held out a little longer, but he obviously still hadn't learned his lesson, because as it says in verse 17, he told her all his heart, all his deepest secrets. It's his hair. And at the same time, it's not the hair too, right? It's his hair because his locks are the main sign of the distinction of being a Nazirite. It's not the hair itself as though he's like it's mystical or he's Rapunzel and it has the power to do things or something. It's his hair because that is the visible sign of being a Nazirite, the main sign of it. And bear in mind, now aside from the jawbone that he used to kill 1,000 Philistines, we don't have a real indication that he broke the Nazirite conditions. Now, he got honey out of a lion's skeleton. He could very well have done that without touching the body. He pulled the jawbone out of the flesh, and it said it was a fresh donkey corpse, but an argument could be made as well. He only did that specifically after the Spirit came mightily upon him. And if there's an excuse for not being in charge of your own actions, that may well be one. So up to this point, I mean, and he's been partying this whole time too. He went to a wedding party. He talks a lot, but we haven't seen any real record of him drinking either. And that was a big part of the Nazirite vow. You don't touch anything from the vine. You don't eat it. You don't drink it. So up to this point, he may have kept his Nazirite status. And Samson credits that status as the reason for his supernatural strength. He is set apart for God, but with his haircut, he would be like any other man. Verses 18 through 22. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, Come up this once, for he hath showed me all his heart. Then the Lord of the Philistines came up unto her, and brought money in their hand. And she made him sleep upon her knees, and she called for a man, and she caused him to shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to afflict him, and his strength went from him. And she said, The Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep, and said, I will go out as at other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. But the Philistines took him and put out his eyes, and brought him down to Gaza, and bound him with fetters of brass, and he did grind in the prison house. Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. So when Delilah saw that he had really told her his deepest secret, he just laid his heart bare for her, I would imagine she stayed with him for a time, let him feel comfortable with the decision, so that he doesn't suspect her of anything. If he told her that and then she ran straight out the door without saying bye, his suspicions would be up. Even this dense guy, his suspicions would be up. But when she felt that she wasn't being watched, she called for the 5 lords of the Philistines, and she said, This time I've got him. This time I really have the answer for you. And they came to her, 5,500 pieces of silver in hand, and she sat down with her big, strong, strapping man. And she said, You lay your head right here down on my lap. You've had a long, hard day. And when he went to sleep, she had somebody come in and shave his head. Now, a lot of scholars hold at the phrase because it says, and she made him to sleep. They think she may have used some kind of concoction, something, a sleeping potion, slipped him something to make him sleepier, because shaving off seven braids of hair from a man's head who has never had a haircut in his life would be difficult. That's the kind of thing that would wake you up. I've seen the videos of people taking guys off the street who have, with the dreadlocks and stuff and trying to clean them up, and man, it's a vigorous undertaking to do something like that. His hair was thick. It was long. They may not have been able to shear it off without him being stone cold asleep, but regardless of which way it was, he falls asleep in her lap, and they shave his head off and they take his strength from him. And like we've been discussing here, we can't say he didn't have a chance. You know, we don't dare say he didn't have a chance, but I mean, rightly, all men do. The promise, it's not expressed until the New Testament, but the maker of the promise is an unchanging God. So when Paul says in 1 Corinthians something, a promise of God, it is true even then. 1 Corinthians chapter 10 says, there hath no temptation taken you, but such as is common to man, but God is faithful, who will not suffer you to be tempted above that ye are able, but will with the temptation also make a way to escape, that ye may be able to bear it. So like I said, that's a New Testament promise, but it's a promise of an unchanging God. So even Samson in the Old Testament had a way out of this. At any point he could have said, you know what, I'm a Nazirite, this isn't right, I'm going to stop this. You know, even beyond the clues that she's been giving this whole time, the red flags that have been popping up, he could have said at any point, the immorality of this is well beyond what I should have in my life, and he could have cleansed himself from it here. He knew the laws of God. He knew the displeasure of his own people even. When he went to his wedding party, they had to give him a wedding party. They had to give him Philistine friends because none of the Israelite people would go with him to marry a Philistine woman. That was at the very beginning of 2 chapters ago here. He saw the red flags over and over from Delilah, and he ignored them because he allowed himself to be overcome by his own lust, to the point of some kind of love, some kind of infatuation, something like that. The point is, it was rooted within him. And verse 20 is to me, the saddest verse in this whole saga. Verse 20 says, and she said, the Philistines be upon thee, Samson. And he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out as at other times before and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. How many people have gotten away with sin so many times they feel invulnerable? Is it God's mercy that keeps somebody from the immediate consequences of sin that they habitually do? Is he giving them multiple chances to come to their senses? Is it Satan? Is one of the best tricks that the devil pulls making you think that there are no consequences to the sins that you commit? Is the deceiver happy to have you living comfortably in your sin, thinking that God doesn't care about it? Samson had continued on in this sin over and over and over until one point he looked back and God wasn't with him, and he didn't know it. Samson couldn't tell God had left him. He rushed forth to break the bands that his lust had fastened to his own hands, only to find that he was no longer set apart for God's service. And then we don't get the detail from it, but what a sad, long chain of events would have immediately followed this. Just as soon as he realized his strength was no longer with him and his hands were bound, it's condensed just down to a single verse, but in that verse, Samson would have seen betrayal on the face of the woman he loved. He would have witnessed a band of Philistines rush out from the back room where they had been lying in wait. He would have been beaten and subdued and bound even further. And when at his absolute most helpless point, on his knees, presumably in front of the 5 Philistine lords, they put out his eyes. And I'm glad we're spared the details on that. The Bible does get graphic in some points here, but you can imagine. I don't want to, but you can. And they bound him in brass shackles and sent him down to Gaza, the place where we are first told of his engagement with harlotry. Is that a coincidence? Is that God's righteous judgment coming full circle on somebody? I can't say. And there in Gaza, he worked in the prison, grinding corn on a wheel day after day. Y'all know the setup. There's one big stone right there and maybe one stone on top of it, and then you just get a handle on it and you're grinding it over and over and over. And some of those, depending on how big a production it is, were pretty heavy, and they might have needed somebody like Samson, but they could strap him to that wheel and have him turn the thing over and over and over. The arrogant Samson, the picture of physical strength, was brought low to being a helpless prisoner, a blind slave in the bottom of a prison. I mean, just absolutely rock bottom in his life. But that's where a lot of people need to be before their arrogance gets in check, before they find themselves returning to God, seeking God once again. And then that last verse there, verse 22, which I love this too. It says, "Howbeit the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven." I must wish you had audio files in the Bible of like, dun, dun, dun. So God's punished Samson. He's brought him low. He's allowed him to wander wide and sink deep. But God has not completely abandoned him. In this low, measly state, he's been stripped of what glory and power God had given him, and God begins to restore Samson in the pit of a prison. He's somewhat heading back to that Nazirite status, back towards some semblance of being in step with God, some kind of reaching for God's holiness. But this time, God has mortified the part of Samson that led him to sin. His eyes are gone now. Now, what's led Samson into all this trouble? His eyes. He's never again going to be able to take in the sight of a woman and have that image subjugate him, dominate his mind, drive him to sin. That's gone. I got into not an argument, it was a debate one time at a Bible study there. Matthew 5:30 says, "And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, and cast it from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell." God has done this for Samson. And I got into this debate one night. We were talking about that verse. And the guy who was talking about it said, "Yeah, but of course we don't take that literally." And I said, "Well, why? I mean, why wouldn't we? Just play devil's advocate per se." And he said, "Well, I mean, that's crazy. Nobody would do something like that to themselves." And I couldn't help but argue that, as much as we would like to take it figuratively and apply it to our lives figuratively, if the root of sin for a person was physical, are they really crazy to excise that part of their life? Now, we chemically castrate rapists, or we advocate for it. What if somebody, intentionally volunteered for something like that? They cannot keep themselves under control. Is it crazy on their part to eliminate that aspect of their lives? If you can't help from thieving, if you're just wildly addicted to pornography and you put out your eyes, is that crazy? I mean, the guy I was debating with, it wasn't an argument. We were civil, we were good friends and everything. But the guy I was debating with at that Bible study there, he's like, "No, it means more figuratively. You realize what drives you to sin in your life, and you take steps to try to avoid it." And I'm like, "Yeah, everything we would list in something like that would be half steps almost to really avoiding the problem." Is it truly crazy to have the kind of dedication to gouge out something, to cut something off? It sounds horrible, and I'm not advocating for it, mind you. I want to see everybody with 10 fingers when y'all come back Sunday. I don't want to see anybody bandaged up. But we have a mentality. Spurgeon once talked about it and said it's far better to suffer than to fall to sin. Far better to suffer than to fall to sin. And we don't do that. As soon as the suffering starts, as soon as it gets difficult, we would rather sin to get our way out of the suffering, because sin can always be forgiven, God's grace always abounds. He is faithful and just to forgive us. Why not sin, get out of the situation with a little white lie, than suffer the consequences of the situation that we've put ourselves into? But, a lot of the old Puritan writers and things like held firmly, it's far better to suffer in this life than to find ourselves sinning against a holy God that loves us. Verses 23 through 26. Well, it's a deep thought, but those pop up in Judges every now and then, don't they? It's not all just everybody lived as they thought was right in their own heart. That the way that plays out leads to some moral implications for the way that we live. Verses 23 through 26. And the lords of the Philistines gathered them together for to offer a great sacrifice unto Dagon their god, and to rejoice. For they said, Our God hath delivered Samson our enemy into our hand. And when the people saw him, they praised their God. For they said, Our God hath delivered into our hands our enemy, and the destroyer of our country, which slew many of us. And it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, that they said, Call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. And Samson said unto the lad that held him by the hand, Suffer me that I may feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth, that I may lean upon them. So they've finally subdued the greatest enemy of their time. And the lords of the Philistines decided, we're going to throw a great party to offer sacrifice to honor our half-fish god Dagon. Dagon's the same one when the ark is taken by the Philistines and they put the ark within the temple. It's next to a statue of Dagon, and they wake up the next day and the statue is fallen over. It's broken off at the ankles. The hand of God toppled the thing, and it says past that day, because the statue of Dagon had fallen to the threshold of the temple, that the Philistine priests would not step on the threshold of the temple. They had a superstition about it, and then they got rid of the ark and things started getting better. Dagon is a half-fish god. What that looks like, we've seen some images from antiquity. Honestly, and from what I understand, some of them depict him human top and fish bottom, and some of them reverse it. As weird as that sounds, you'd think they'd pick one or the other. Either way, he's half fish. When the people saw him, and that is Dagon, the fish god, not Samson just yet. So you can imagine they're having this big party. They're parading an image of their fish god through the streets of Gaza, cheering and drinking and wildly celebrating because Samson, who slew 30 men for his own wedding party and at least 1,000 more, heaps upon heaps, with the jawbone of an ass, Samson has been completely defeated. The destroyer of their country, this infamous, barbaric, violent man who enjoyed nothing more than killing us helpless little Philistines, we finally caught him. Osama bin Laden would probably be the closest thing we could parallel to that, for there was a time there when that name was on everybody's lips, and when he was brought to justice, a lot of people were, really celebrating that this enemy of the United States had finally died. When the people had enough wine in them, they called for Samson to be brought out to entertain them. And they bring him out of his prison. He's presented to the people so that they can make sport of him, or so that he can make sport for them. The idea being, we don't know exactly what they made him do. He may have been dancing. He may have said, sing us a song. Who knows what it looks like? Feats of strength even. That wouldn't be out of the picture. The guy's blind and he's doing nothing but churning corn in the bottom of a prison, and his hair is starting to grow, so his strength is probably starting to come back just a little bit. They may have been saying, hey, here's a rock, crush it. Here's a bar, bend this thing. We heard you're strong, here, lift this. They did.
So that's making sport of this massive man that could kill all these people and things.
He's got a little boy leading him by the hand because he's blind and he can't make his way around. And he certainly can't hear right now with all the partying going on. And they make sport of Samson until they're either tired of seeing him doing whatever he's doing, or you can really only get so much joy out of throwing spoiled food at somebody, right? Before that kind of gets old. Your arm gets tired or something like that. So at some point they get fed up with it. And when he was finished, the young boy that was leading Samson around, again because he was blind, took him over to the pillars of the great temple of Dagon at Samson's request, so that he could lean against them. Verses 27 through 31. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there, and there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women that beheld while Samson made sport. And Samson called unto the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God, that I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And Samson took hold of the 2 middle pillars upon which the house stood, and on which it was borne up, of the one with his right hand, and of the other with his left. And Samson said, Let me die with the Philistines. And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. Then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the burying place of Manoah his father, and he judged Israel 20 years. When it says the house, they're talking about the temple of Dagon. The temple is full of men and women, including the 5 lords of the Philistines. And we can only really guess what the temple looked like as a whole. We're told pretty directly here that it had a large flat roof because they're all partying on top of it. So a big old flat roof, and it's held up by at least 2 pillars. As best they can tell, it was probably 4 pillars in the front, maybe 4 in the back, 2 of them really close together, and then 2 at the ends. There is a commonly depicted image of Samson. When y'all picture Samson on the pillars, I've seen it depicted with him chained to the pillars, and he pulls the chains in and topples the pillars like that. That's what I'm used to seeing. That's not what's described right here. It says he put one hand on one pillar, one hand on the other. And so they've got to be pretty close together for him to be able to go from this and push, because if they're way out here and he's barely reaching them, he's not going to be able to extend his arms to be able to push the things off. So you can picture 2 pillars that are pretty close together, but they're pretty sturdy, load-bearing pillars. So the top, the roof of this thing with all of the people on it, when he pushes the 2 pillars out, probably would have buckled in the middle and collapsed with all of them there. Samson, in verse 28, calls out to God. And I don't know that he hasn't. He's been judging Israel for 20 years. But this is the first recorded prayer of Samson since he was given water at Lehi, since he killed the 1,000 Philistines and cried out in thirst. God met him then. So we don't know how long has passed between that point and this point, because it says the whole time period of it was 20 years. And we don't know that he's completely neglected God. We assume as much. This seems to be the first time he's actually prayed to God since that point. And the exact phrasing that's used is, that I may be avenged with a vengeance of one. That's the formal wording of it there. That's the exact translation. Some have taken that to mean that Samson believes no amount of vengeance could suffice for the loss of both of his eyes, but he's asking God to allow him to strike the Philistines for even just one of my eyes. A vengeance of one. Others believe that it means, let me be avenged of both of my eyes in this one act. We don't know exactly how to take it. Regardless, he calls out to God and says that he wants vengeance. He puts one pillar on the right with the right hand and one with the left hand, and knowing he's not going to make it out alive, knowing that this is it, he pushes with all his might, and he brings down the temple of Dagon, killing everyone, seemingly everyone in the process. There were 3,000 people on the roof. It says that a lot of them died, and he killed way more in his death than he did in his life. Is that suicide? Technically, yes. Kinda. Yeah, it's like, what was the movie?
Heroes of the Bible, narrated by Charlton Heston. Have you not seen that?
That's not the movie I'm thinking of. I'm thinking of Dr. Strangelove, where the guy's riding the nuclear bomb with a cowboy hat down. He's like, I know this is going to take me with it, but I'm Right, yeah, a little different. That's the two complete ends of the spectrum, actually. A little different there.
You know, the Philistines are very arrogant also. It's almost like one of the old James Bond movies where it says, okay, instead of just killing him,
Yeah.
let's do this, you know.
Let me tell you my whole plan, set up an elaborate laser that's slowly approaching you, and then leave the room.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what they did here with Samson, instead of just killing him, which would have ended his life, and, you know, going on to they wanted to make sport of him, and it ineffectively mocked God. And, you know, that's a bad idea.
It's a bad idea.
But
When
then, like suicide, the thing, I don't see it as suicide. I'm seeing it as Samson praying to God for that one last time, and this is my one last thing to
That's-
serve you.
his intent is not to take his own life, that's a byproduct of it.
Yeah.
That's collateral damage. His intent is to strike against the Philistines. There is a difference. It's not the same, because we've seen falling on your sword because a woman hit you in the head with a rock. We've seen that. I want to kill myself.
I mean, it's like a soldier jumping on a live grenade and saying,
Yeah.
So that's not suicide. That's an act of bravery to save other people.
Or riding a nuclear bomb like a cowboy in a rodeo.
Yeah.
Either way. God empowered Samson to do this thing. It's a sacrifice, what Samson is doing. He realizes his life will be gone. But at the same time, in the plan of God, he brought Samson to that Philistine woman at the very beginning, initially, the one that he was betrothed to intentionally escalate the conflict between the Israelites and the Philistines, because their time for judgment was at hand. So when Samson finally returns to God, and again, he's come from the lowest point, the absolute lowest point of his life, blinded, a slave, in a prison, grinding corn, being made sport of in front of the whole city of Gaza. When he finally brings himself to turn back to God and to cry out to God, he strengthens him one last time, and he topples the temple. And that's no small thing. It's the destruction of their temple, first off, which would have been a huge deal. But this is with the 5 lords of the Philistines too, and 3,000 other people. This would cripple their society for a time. And on top of that, yeah, it's spitting in the face of their half-fish god, but this is taking out, it'd be like bombing the White House while everybody is there, bombing Congress or something like that. You're eliminating all of the leaders at once in a land. The whole place would be in absolute turmoil. They would have no idea what to do. And we kind of see that too, because in the aftermath, his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him. They went into Gaza to get his body, and they weren't stopped. It doesn't say that anybody fought them to do it. Samson toppled this temple, killed all of their leaders, and then his family strolls up and says, we're going to take the body. And I don't know if there was not a unified front there to say, no, that's not right. This guy just killed a bunch of people, and we're going to let his body rot or something like that. No, they took the body. And then at the very end there, it says the 20-year judgment of Samson ended with that 1 feat of strength. And again, I wish we had more detail in some of this. Samson was a weak man. He was beset by a very specific sin that ended up being his downfall. But even still, the Bible talks about him in a positive manner in some places. That it's the cycle that none of us are immune to, mind you. We call ourselves good Christian people, but I've heard it said we're all but like 3 really bad days away from being at the absolute lowest point of our lives, where any kind of morality that we feel like we really have is starting to come into question. Samson was taken to that kind of a low point, and then he turned back to God. And that little bit of repentance at the very end there, that seeking God from the lowest place was enough for him to qualify to be one of the heroes of the faith, to be called out at a later time as somebody who, in the power of God, struck out against wickedness, even though he was one that went through that whole cycle. So all of that to say, when we do find brethren that are within that cycle, at the bottom of it or coming up from it, we shouldn't look down on them. They can still be used of God. Yes, ma'am.
Is it time for questions?
Sure. If you got a question, well then yes.
Okay. Well, as we were reading this last chapter, I found a note that I wrote years ago. Samson's strength was not in his hair, it was in his obedience to God. And that's what I've always believed. It was, hair's not powerful.
No, there's nothing supernatural about the hair.
So, why did they make that statement that the hair of his head began to grow again?
That was,
So it leads people that don't dig in the scriptures to maybe think it was his hair that helped him be strong.
well, I mean, some of it was. I mean, it's not that the hair in itself was mystical in any way. What it's saying is he was starting to be restored to the position of being set apart for God, that he was, because that was, you can't look at somebody and tell they're a Nazirite and they don't eat grapes and they don't drink wine. You can't tell anything about that by looking at somebody, but you can tell Nazirite people the biggest showing point of it is that their hair is long. You can tell that guy's never had a haircut in his whole life. There must be something different about him. That was the physical attribute that set him apart to the rest of the world, even though he was obedient and everything else, and not being unclean and not eating anything or drinking anything of the vine. And again, it's his obedience in general. It's a hard line to walk when you're calling it out on Samson there, because at the same time, he could be considered unclean for having slept with a harlot as well. That's not a clean living by any means. Those women are unclean. But he still did it. Was God allowing him to do that for the sake of God's overall plan? It seems that way. But there was a mentality that Samson had of being a Nazirite and what he thought that meant, and the hair was part of it. So maybe the hair coming back began to restore his faith in himself as a Nazirite for God. Some type of tangible feeling of his faith in God that he could see coming back, to know that God is with me again. We can only speculate on something like that. Was the hair mystical? No, not in any way. Did it have significant meaning? Yes, it did at the same time. It wasn't just hair to Samson or to God, for that matter, really.
That helps.
Yes, ma'am.
Don't you think that Samson finally got what he did wrong? And maybe that's when he started turning back to God, and that's when his hair started growing?
I think in a prison grinding corn, you got nothing but time for reflection, and you're not getting distracted. You are alone with your thoughts because you're blind.
Well, yeah, you're blind.
That's what it's just you and your own thoughts, the images that you can create in your head, your ability to reflect at that point. There's nobody coming in and distracting you. It's not like Alcatraz where you're looking at the little baby bird over there or something like that and finding other things to do. It's just you sitting in a cell grinding corn. I imagine that's a whole lot of time for reflection on where you went wrong. And the fact that he did eventually turn back to God leads me to believe that, he did come to that conclusion, that he figured it out at some point. I don't know. Is that it? All right. Chapter 17 next week.